Hello friends, today we have an amazing guest, Andy Kaufman. Andy Kaufman is project management legend. He's one of the most sought out keynote speaker. Let me give you a brief introduction of Andy Kaufman. He is recognized as one of the world's leading experts on leadership and project management. He is the president of the Institute of Leadership Excellence and Development, which helps organizations all around the world to improve their ability to lead and deliver. In addition to running the institute, Andy works with leaders at the United Nations to improve their ability to deliver on their initiatives. He teaches MBA classes at Loyola Chicago Graduate School of Business and works with global clients such as Marriott International, Microsoft, United Airlines, Takeda Credit Suisse, ExxonMobil, and many more. Before becoming an international sought-out speaker, Andy started as a software developer and was promoted into management for all the wrong reasons. As he grew from the frontline manager into senior leader, Andy developed approach for leading and delivering that he now shares with audience and coaching clients all around the world. He is the author of three books, and I would highly recommend that you read all of those books. And he is very acclaimed about this podcast, People and Project podcast. Friends, let's welcome all this great man and learn from him. Hello, Andy. How are you?
Hey, thank you so much for the invitation, Amer. I appreciate it very much.
Andy, first of all, can you tell us a little about your journey?
Yeah,
Like,
yeah. I started actually even in high school. I had a teacher who had access to computers, and I don't know that he taught me so much as much as he did not get in the way. He said, "Do anything you want," and so I knew in high school I wanted to study computers, studied software development in college, and started as a software developer. And as you said in the intro, I got promoted for all the wrong reasons, and it's true. We had a small company bought out by a bigger company, bought out by a bigger company, and when they took over, they fired a bunch of the managers, and so I got promoted into management, not because I had management skill, but sometimes what we do is we say, "Oh, they're a reasonably good." Maybe technical lead, let's make them a manager, right? Or they're reasonably good at this, let's make them a project manager, sometimes called the halo effect. And it can be devastatingly bad. And I had to learn a lot of things, but I went from being a manager to a director to being a vice president of systems. And through that process, learned a lot about business, but started speaking at conferences. And eventually I ran into somebody who said, do you speak for a living? And I'm like, you can speak for a living? I didn't know that. So I started looking into it more, and it led to more opportunities. And so about 19 years ago, I decided to do it full time. And it has been a true joy to be able to work with organizations around the world and doing what I do best. So it is a true privilege. That's a little bit of my journey there.
okay. It was when I read about you that you were promoted for all the wrong reasons. I was thinking, should I ask, should I not ask? And thank you for telling all the wrong reasons that you were promoted to that position.
Yeah.
Okay, and I am really fascinated by your podcast, People and Project podcast. Can you tell us why you started it and what was the basic burning desire behind that?
Yeah. In 2009, I was interviewed by someone for a podcast. And
Okay.
afterwards, I asked him, I just said, how does this work? Because in 2009, there weren't that many podcasts. And he was very generous with the knowledge about it. And I am a geek at heart. And so,
Okay.
from a technology perspective, I thought, I'll just try it. And maybe my first episode, it was only my mom and dad who listened. I don't know. But uh, that's 293 episodes ago. And I think the burning desire was our podcast is not generally about me teaching. It's almost every episode is about me interviewing people, similar to what you're doing here today, right? And so the kind of the burning desire was what could we learn together? And when I'm learning something, like you and I, before we started the session, you talked about how Gary Vee has been influential for you. You're reading his books. And one of his principles is just teach people what you're learning. And so that's what my podcast is. I'm learning right with the listeners. And so it's the burning desire, the underlying burning desire has been, I want to learn. As I learn, let's share that with other people.
Okay. Okay. You have also some of the top people like Adam Grant, Ken Blank, Amy Kelly, Andy Crow. Like they are one of the most favorite people in management as well as in project management. What are the top three lessons that you would like to share that you learned from your podcast?
Oh, boy, there's so many lessons. It would almost be, picking specific guests and take lessons, but I would say, you know, there are themes that recur, and I would say some of the biggest themes that recur, I would say, would be it all comes down to people, and that's probably one of the biggest themes. So we talk about project management, but it's really more about people management, not in the sense of being the boss, but stakeholder management and interacting with people, and you know uh, trying to influence sponsors. And so there's definitely a theme across the podcast about how do we deal with difficult people, how do we influence people around, not in some manipulative sort of way, but how do we try to help people do what they need to do and what we need to do to deliver value. So I would say that is definitely a big theme. I would say general productivity, like ways to stay focused and to not get exhausted and burned out. I think we've had a number of guests that have been along those lines. And so, what does it even mean to lead? Even though the podcast is designed to help people get continuing education, like PDUs, most of the episodes are not about technical project management. Most of them, there are some, but most of them is more about the leadership and kind of like the business side of project management.
Okay, okay. Because, and there is something special that I really appreciate about your podcast that you make some episodes are small videos that you give some small lessons like from 170 you try whenever you were speaking as a keynote speaker, you give some small lessons which people can learn from it. Your journey has been very awesome.
Mhm.
But I always ask this question from all my friends that if you can change one thing, if you have some time machine and you can change something in your journey, would you change something? And if yes, what would you change?
Yeah, I love the question because it every once in a while I'll hear people say I wouldn't change anything, and I would say that's probably not a very self-aware person. But I will say, if I went back in time and I had to be as stupid as I was back then, maybe, maybe I wouldn't. But
Okay.
knowing what I know now, I would say from a personal perspective, it would definitely be more about just being very transparent. It'd probably be more serious about my faith growing up. I feel like I did not realize that it was possible to have a very strong faith, and that for that to influence how I coach people, how I teach. And not that I'm preaching, but that I think I would have taken that more seriously earlier, because it fundamentally affects how I do what I do. And so I think that's probably something I would do earlier. And I think on a professional standpoint, you would probably not catch me reading a book very often years ago. Yeah. And
Okay.
now if I'm in a waiting room somewhere, I have a book open. I just have a very strong desire to keep learning. And I think I think that advice for anyone new in their career, it's not just a cliche that leaders are readers. It's really true. And I know you're a reader. You do a lot of reading too. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. That's great. Now I just want to ask you a question about your books. You're navigating the winds of change and staying on course in business. Now, this is exactly the time to read that book in COVID-19 times.
Yeah.
Can you put some shine on your book,
Yeah.
major ideas on that?
Yeah. I appreciate you asking. You know, the metaphor used in the book is like a sailboat, and I live in the middle of the United States, so I don't live by an ocean. But you do not have to be a sailor to understand the metaphor that it's, there are many things you cannot control. Like the sailor cannot control the wind, cannot control the waves. The sailor can decide today's not a good day to sail, but once they're
Mm-hmm.
out there, there's very much they cannot control. And so
Okay.
it's easy, like what we've been going through globally, to feel like we're a victim.
Okay.
But the thing that a sailor can do, and I took sailing lessons after I got out of college, and my wife and I, earlier in our marriage, before we had children, and when we had more time to do that, we would be out a lot. And one of the things you learn is there are things you can do to adjust to the wind and the waves. And
Okay.
there are things that we can do to be safer on the boat. And so the book uses this metaphor of, though we can't control these things, what can we do? And so, for example, one of the things that you learn on a boat is if the wind is coming this way, you don't head into the wind. You stop if that's the case. So, so learning like, okay, so if this is happening, I can be upset about how my government is doing something. I can be upset about what my boss is doing, but that that is not going to help. But what can I do to adjust? So based on what's going on there, what can I do to adjust and maybe leverage it, react to it, take advantage of it? Like once again, it all can sound like a cliche, but I fundamentally believe that every change has opportunity. Every
Okay.
change has opportunity. And so we can say, well, what are the opportunities here? What can we do to adjust? And
Yes.
so one more lesson there is the captain of the boat is has to coordinate the people who are on the boat. The captain can't just say, "What a bunch of losers I have." That's not right. It's like, how
Yes.
can I surround myself with very good, people that are good with sailing? How can I surround myself well? How can I take responsibility instead of blaming, instead of pointing fingers? What can I do to take responsibility? So those
Okay.
would be some examples of ideas in the book.
Okay. Okay. So now, right now, we are in a boat, and that boat is stuck in a storm. The storm is COVID-19. So,
Okay.
what can an individual do? He cannot jump in the boat. Yes, we know we have to stay at home, we have to stay safe. But what can an individual do to improve himself? Because we have heard that millions of people have already lost their job in this pandemic,
Mhm.
and million more are going to lose until this pandemic is gone. So,
Mhm.
especially for this underdeveloped countries like Pakistan, what can we do?
Yeah. I had a guest on recently who he said, though we are all in the same storm, we are not all in the same boat, which I think is an interesting idea because some people have been impacted much more than other people. And
Okay.
some people can very easily work from home. And so they
Mhm.
have reliable power, reliable internet, and their job allows it. And so sometimes it's very easy for the people in that boat to think, not that big of a deal. And then there
True.
are people who are in desperate situations, and
Mhm.
that might be health, or they may have had a loss of loved ones, or their job is not considered essential. And so, they've lost their job. And so I think it's important for us to realize that this has been so much harder for many people than some of us appreciate. Okay. So anything that I say here, I don't want to say flippantly or without recognizing how difficult this is. Um, we can't change our government, although we can try to influence it. Right? We can't change our company, but
Mhm.
we can try to influence our projects. The
Okay.
Probably the single biggest thing that I find is helpful under times of great change is, what can I learn? What can I learn? What can I learn? There's a quote by a gentleman named Eric Hoffer. And Eric Hoffer says it this way. I may not get it word perfect, but this is pretty close. He says, in times of profound change, it's the learners who inherit the earth, while it's the learned that find themselves beautifully prepared for a world that no longer exists. So the reason I share this is I'm not trying to diminish any of the pain that's been associated. But this is what I found, is being a continual learner is not an option. And so if someone is in between jobs, maybe it's time to get a certification. Maybe it's time to listen to more podcasts. Maybe it's time to read more books. Maybe it's time to think, could this actually be a gift in that I didn't really like what I was doing anyway? And so is there a way to kind of, learn, start talking to people about what are they doing, other opportunities. When I made my change, the thing that pushed me into making my change was I just wasn't happy at that vice president level. It wasn't about pay. I just didn't like it. And I didn't have a great relationship with my boss. And I looked at that and I go, there's nothing about her job that I want. It just looks worse. And so I got to a time of like serious reflection. And I think every one of us, I'm sure this has happened to you. It's happened to almost every one of us. And it will eventually. Things that we would never choose, they happen. And it turns out later on to be an opportunity. It turns out to be something that kind of got us to do what we needed to do. And so, I would say it's okay to feel bad about the situation. It's okay to be upset, but use that as the motivation to say, what can I learn? Who can I be spending more time with? What can I learn from them? And how, is there some intersection between that and what someone really enjoys doing? And try to pursue that. I think one lesson from my career is I early, so probably 7 years before I started my company, I was asked to speak at a Microsoft event and tech ad. So they told me there'd be 7,500 people there. And at that time, if I had to speak in front of 10 people, it was very challenging. I would be so nervous. That'd be a mess. Would you come and speak, do a demonstration? And I said yes. And after I said yes, I'm like, why did I say yes? That was stupid. That was terrible. It was terrible. But it went okay. I lived. And then it led to more opportunities, I think in a time like this, maybe look at the opportunities that come your way, and maybe you need to say yes, even if it feels really scary. It may lead to some other opportunities.
Right. So I would say continuous learning, the approach of Kaizen is the new approach right now. We have to become a constant learner, and we need to do self-reflection where we can improve ourselves and how we can move ahead. Now, a very important topic that you discuss in your podcast, and I would really love to do this. I have done many events on this keynote speaking, but I would like to know your perspective on this habit.
On habit?
How, on habit. How to change habit and how to maintain your habit. Let me give you an example. That I get a straight question from 4 to 5 people, and the syntax is almost the same. Okay, we follow the power of habit. Charles Duhigg will get a leverage on us. We change our habit, but after some time, even we followed it for 21 days because many philosophers say that go for 21 days. Then there is Robin Sharma who says go it for 66 days. We also try to do it for 66 days, but after 3 months we're back to zero. So what to do? Can you put something on it?
Yeah, I feel like Charles Duhigg's book is a must read. It's I thought it was very interesting. He's a brilliant writer, and his idea is there's a trigger and you take some action and there's some reward that reinforces the trigger. So intellectually, I found that helpful, but it didn't change. I didn't find that it helped me change my habits. You know what really changed for me was when I interviewed James Clear and his book Atomic Habits. And there's a really powerful idea in this book. And I'll summarize it like this. Outcomes are only trailing indicators of our habits. So if somebody doesn't like if I don't like my outcomes, I can complain about them, but I really have to look at my habits. So outcomes are just a result of our habits. So I think that's helpful. But where he goes on that one is, but what causes our habits? Identity drives habits. Habits drive our outcomes. You want to change your outcomes, change your identity. So that's before Duhigg. It's before Duhigg, really. It's identity. So this is what I mean. There are some people that go, the truth is, I'm bad at math, or I'm not a people person, or, I'm not an exerciser, or, people often have a lot of doubts about their own capabilities. I've had a number of people on the podcast that talk about the imposter syndrome, like, I'm not good enough. Your identity drives your habits. Your habits drive your outcomes. So let's say someone says, I really want to exercise more. I'm going to work at exercising more. Well, you're doomed. But if you look at the identity as, I'm a healthy person. Now, maybe I don't feel like a healthy person, but I'm an exerciser, or I'm a whatever identity you want to take on. James says it this way: even though that may not feel true, every time you go to the work, and eventually, depending on what country you're in, you'll eventually be able to go to a workout facility. But every time you even work out at home, you're casting a vote for the person you want to be. Okay? So focus on the identity. So let's say someone feels like, I just don't feel confident when senior leadership is in the room. I just don't feel confident, right? So I'm going to take on an identity of, I'm going to really work at being more confident. I'm a confident person, not arrogant, but I'm going to be confident. What would a confident person do here? And then look at the outcomes over time. And so this idea has been revolutionary for me. I think it applies to every area of life. What is my identity? How do I see myself? And chances are we are limiting ourselves based on how we see ourselves. And and one more idea on the habits is in BJ Fogg wrote a book about tiny habits, and his research, although James Clear talks about it as well, is that environment trumps everything. And so for the longest time, I wanted to take vitamins, I wanted to remember, but I'd always forget that I take them until I put them out next to my sink in the bathroom in the morning. So I'd put it out the night before. When I see them in the morning, I'm like, oh, I didn't take my vitamins yet. Environment, and Duhigg talks about this with environment. And so if somebody wants to work out more, put your workout clothes, your shoes, and so they're next to your bed when you wake up. I want to do that. So environment trumps everything, and identity drives habits, drives outcomes. I find that that those are two very powerful ideas with habits.
So for you change your identity and you manage your environment, you can have a long-lasting habit, right?
Right. Yeah.
Okay. From Samad Khan, we have a question. I would like to know, what are the guiding principles to employ in leading a team successfully in time of crisis caused by COVID-19?
So how to lead a team?
How to lead teams in COVID-19?
Yeah.
Because we have some principles before COVID-19, and we know that COVID-19 is going to change lives. It's not like it's a temporary. We understand that this will last. So what are the guiding principles during COVID-19 and after COVID-19?
Yeah. So I love the question because good practice before COVID-19 is still good practice after COVID-19. And so during, before COVID-19, it was very important to build relationships with your team, to understand what are their strengths, what are their goals and things like that, to have check-ins, whether it's a daily part of a daily stand-up or check-in or a weekly check-in or one-on-one. But, good practice before is still good practice during and after. In fact, in some ways, one of the things I found is more check-ins than before, and trying to really understand not just status on a task, but how are you personally doing, as a person. And now that still made sense before COVID-19, right? So it still made sense, but it's like still the relationship. There's something very powerful about we. This team is a we. And even if you're working from home, we are in this together, and anything we can do to help. And another thing I found during this time, which is still true before this time and will be after, is the more that we can provide certainty to our team, the better. Here's the priorities. Here's how we think we're going to get there. Inviting them into it to help us come up with the plan. But sometimes in times of uncertainty, we're just, and if we're, that spills over to the people around us. And so this sense of authentically trying to stay calm, authentically trying to say, hey, all right, based on what's happened, these are the new priorities, allowing people to speak into it and to help shape how we get there. The more, there's a guy named David Rock who runs the Neuro Leadership Institute, and he's got this acronym called SCARF, but it stands for status, certainty, autonomy, relatedness, and fairness. And he would explain it much better. But the point is, the more that we can raise the status of the people around us, give them certainty, even though there's a lot of uncertainty, what is certain, give them autonomy, which is give them choices, give them the ability to speak into it. Relatedness is we're part of the we, and try to keep things as fair as possible, even though things are not always fair, but we try to. I find that those 5 things made sense before, they make a lot of sense now, and they always will. Raise the status, give people certainty, give them choice, give them the sense that we are in this together, and try to keep things as fair as possible. I found it to be very helpful.
That is a very good answer. Now, another question from Yusuf Ali is how to inspire your team to be innovative?
To be, how to inspire a team to be?
Innovative.
Iterative?
Innovative, creative, how to think out of the box.
Yeah. So sometimes a good way to understand an answer is to understand the opposite. So here's a really good way to keep a team not innovative. Every time they come up with an idea, shoot it down.
Right.
That's a really good way to do it. And even though most of us that are listening here would say, oh, I would never do that. I wouldn't do that. We do it. And I think we do it more than not. So I have a goal for people in my team to, unless there's a compelling reason to say no, I try to say yes. So if they come up with an idea, maybe I think there might be there's a different way, but unless there's a compelling reason to say no, I try to say yes. And when we provide opportunities for people to be innovative, they are more likely to be innovative. When we actually listen and maybe try to raise their status, like that was a good idea. Yeah. What else? What more could we do? The more that we demonstrate our willingness to listen to them. Now, if they have a crazy idea or if it's not an idea aligned with priority, maybe it's not yes, it might be just not yet. or it might be we need to find ways to adjust on this. But I think more than we realize, we squash innovation. We just squash it. We just say no. We say we don't have time. We come up with excuses and we shut it down. And you shut it down enough, people get the message.
Okay. How to get your idea across is asked by Zara.
Yeah, I'm so sorry. Say that one again.
How to get your ideas across? How we can transfer our ideas? Now, as you said, that people shut it off even before listening to you. People start to say no. I want to communicate my idea. I want my team to listen my idea. So how I can communicate effectively so that
Yeah.
others can understand my ideas.
Yeah. So it's like, how can I get my ideas to be accepted? Is that along the lines?
Yes, yes,
Mhm.
thank you.
Yeah. Well, there is no single formula for this, but here's one way to not get it accepted: is make it all about me, like my idea. If it ever comes off as being about me, then that's not going to go very well. And so we often say, right? You've maybe heard this too. I'm sure many people have heard this. What's in it for them, right? So make it clear what's in it for them, and yet sometimes we need to influence people, and there is not something in it for them, right? Sometimes it's not true. So we try, but I had to learn this the hard way, where a boss, actually somebody multiple levels above me, was making some decisions that I did not agree with. And I knew him reasonably well. So I got on his calendar and I said to him, you're not making the what's in it for me clear. And I'll never forget what he said, Amer. What he said was, Andy, sometimes it's not about you. Sometimes it's what's in it for us. And so even if the person you're trying to influence, it's not a direct benefit for them, but is there a way that we can show the benefit for the organization overall? And one of the foremost writers and researchers on influence is Dr. Robert Cialdini, and I had him on the podcast, and he's just got some many brilliant ideas. But one of the very simple ideas is that people want to know why. So if we don't make it clear the why behind this, and the why is not just me, right? It's what's in it for the customer, what's in it for the stakeholders, trying to make sure it's clear there. So there's no simple answer, but I'll tell you that interview with Dr. Robert Cialdini is a great one for influence.
Sure. I'm gonna put that interview in the link, especially for Vera something. She can also watch, and I'm also gonna watch that podcast. Okay, another question from Samar, and Andy, I have to say that we are getting hundred of questions. We can go whole life, but also we don't have it. So my question is, how hard is it to switch a job after being at the top of the ladder and start all over again from the bottom of the ladder at something you believe? And what would you suggest it to anyone confidently? You can relate it, you are at the top of the ladder, you are at the software house, you are working very good. So what to do?
Yeah.
And this question is asking by many millennium, like they want to have some why, especially after Simon Sinek, that you have to have why. They're always looking for some passion, something that they need to follow to.
Yeah.
And I totally agree with the concept that your burning desire, your passion, it has to be something inside you. So what to do for this?
It's a very good question. And once again, everything is within the context of that particular person. So I don't want to pretend that I can understand everyone's situation, but often it's not from the top of the ladder to the bottom. A lot of times it's from the top of the ladder to maybe one step back or lateral. Yeah. So sometimes that's what it is. And it might be further down, but it goes back a little bit to what Cialdini's point was, is if I have a strong why of why I'm making that change. So in my case, I made the change at a certain age that I felt like I do not want to be 70, or if I get to live to 70 or 80 years old, I don't want to wish that I would have tried. So my why was, I think maybe this is something I should do. But I went from a pretty good income to zero. Yeah. So that felt like higher on the ladder to at the bottom. But my strong why, my burning desire was, I think this is aligned with who I am. It's aligned with my gifts and talents and things like that. I'm going to give it a window of time. So I gave it a window of time, 1 year. I have a window of time, and so we had just enough money to pay for if nothing happened in that year, we because I had good coaching to help me with that. So we're going to try it. So maybe for that person who wants to try an opportunity, give yourself a window of time. Good project management uses constraints to give focus. And so set a stake in the ground, right? A milestone of like, I will do everything I can to be successful by there. If it doesn't happen, well, then I'll try something different, but do that. And so understanding the why, the burning desire can be very helpful. And that may not be a grand and glorious career aspiration. It might be, my why is to pay the bills for my family right now. So there's somebody I know really well who he was pretty high level up in a retail environment, but retail just got exploded, or just fell apart. He's working at a grocery store, so it feels like it's much lower, but he gets health benefits for his family, and it's paying the bills. He's taking advantage of his off hours to prepare for project management certification. And so his why is not some big career thing as much as, I'm taking advantage of this time to prepare for the future.
One of the questions asked by people is that we are in the software domain. How much it is effective for us right now to prepare for PMP and also for ACP? And you have done both PMP and ACP. So what's your advice on this one?
Yeah. So it's interesting because in some ways, a certification only proves that you passed a test, right? So in some ways, that's all it proves. But one of my favorite reasons to get certifications is the learning that happens through it. And so I encourage people, regularly to get a PMP, not because it proves that you are a better project manager than everyone else in the world. It only proves you passed the test, but that process to get to the point that you can pass a test, there is great learning opportunities. And so especially in a difficult economy, it can be helpful because it helps your resume or CV to be better. And so if there's a pile of CVs this thick and only these have certifications, that is good. But I find that in particular, the PMP, because I help people get their PMPs regularly, to me, I want them to get their PMP. But more importantly, I want them to learn to get really good at delivering projects. And I feel like done well, they are coupled. They're together. The ACP, is one of the things I love about the ACP is it is not only Scrum. It is not only Kanban, right? So because your experience that you learned about Crystal and DSDM, right? You learned about many different things that was not specific to one approach. And so I feel like the ACP was wonderful just to give a broader understanding of this very difficult world to define called Agile. And so I have no regrets about pursuing the ACP or encouraging people to get it.
So at this time, especially at COVID-19, it is one of the best things to prepare your PMP, especially when the PMI has announced that you can give at your home, you have online service. So you can prepare from Andy or me, and then you can go for PMP exam or Agile exam.
Yeah.
Okay. Sharian is asking, most of the projects were closed during lockdown. due to which many contractors face downfall in the term of profit at the end. How one can save costs from your project once work at site resumes.
So it's how to save costs because
How to be more effective in the cost wise when the project resumed.
uh, yeah. Well, that's actually a really good question. And once again, it depends on the project. But,
Mhm.
you know, in today's world, it's because a project got put on hold. And then after things settle down, it's restarted. But this happens with projects all the time. Projects get stopped and started, stopped and started. And so, in some ways, what to do now is similar to what we would have done before COVID when a project gets restarted. And
Mhm.
when I inherit a project that was either stopped or maybe passed over to me, I'm really looking for only two things. I'm looking for, do we have a reasonably good understanding of what needs to be delivered? And do we have a reasonably good plan to deliver that?
Mhm.
And you know what I find a lot of times? Um,
Well,
Very fuzzy, not clear, and a lot of fantasy, a lot of hope. And so good project management says, okay, we're going to restart this. Is the charter still valid? Is the business case still valid, or has that changed? Are there new stakeholders or different stakeholders than what we originally started? Is the success criteria, still the same? And so are there different milestones that we need to adjust? So I find that sometimes when things get restarted, people just want to burn the previous plan. You don't have to burn it, but where's the plan good? Let's use it. Where does the plan need to be revised? But I like to, I just, it may have to be treated almost like a new project. And we do good project management practices just like we normally would. Yeah.
okay. Now just last few questions because we are near the end. Your most sought out programs are about communication. So I would just like to have some few things about that.
Yeah.
What are the key factors that obstruct good communication?
Uh, yeah. You know, so many things, right? This could be a whole week's discussion right here. But I would say probably one of the biggest lessons I've learned about communication is how it is hurt because of bias. Like for one reason or another, like I I think I was being very clear, but I was not being clear. And I when someone said something, I made assumptions because of my biases about what they meant. And so, you know, for example, when we write, we have to write to the reader, not to what makes sense for me. I had uh,
Mhm.
I had a brain researcher on the podcast named John Medina, and he has this thing he calls John's second rule of marriage. He doesn't have a first rule, which is funny, but he has a second rule of marriage, and his second rule of marriage is what is obvious to you is obvious to you. Yeah, and so I think that's good advice even outside of marriage. That I may think I'm being very clear, but in the work that I do with United Nations and in other global companies, what makes sense to me in my Chicago mindset would not make sense to the person. I was working with somebody from Syria and Somalia recently, uh, and Congo, and now the context is different in so many ways. So I just because it's clear to me doesn't mean it's going to be clear to them. So I think it's a call for humility and
Mhm.
curiosity of like, if it doesn't go well, I can blame them, but that doesn't help. How could I say it differently? How can I remember scarf as I say it? Can I raise their status? Can I, instead of going, let me say it more slowly because you're an idiot, right? Don't do that. Don't do that. Right? How can I check for understanding, not assume understanding? How can I customize it to them? And so To me, communication is a little bit like most things in life, like cricket, like golf, like baking. You have some good days, you have some bad days. But you're trying to get better. That's what you're trying to do. You're trying to get better, and the payoff for project managers is huge if we can get better at this. But it almost always is less focus on us and more focus on the person we're trying to communicate with.
True. You have a five-step process for improving your ability to understand. Can you put some shine on that?
Yeah, on the 5 steps.
Yes.
Yeah. We've got a keynote called "That's Not What I Meant." That's the name of the keynote. That's not what I meant, and it uses a bit of a metaphor. Actually, the basis of it is from an interview I had with Kathy Sailett. Kathy Sailett is episode 149. I remember this one because she is an improv artist. She is a musical performer. And one of the things that she says in the book is that everything is a performance. Everything is a performance. Like everything is improv. Like, like you and I, this is not scripted. We're not reading teleprompters. Everything is improv. And everything in life, you could say, is improv and is a performance. So to make communication better, like in a situation where I'm trying to influence a boss or trying to influence a team member, think of it as a performance. And that maybe not seem right, but the first step is to break the scene down. Think of it as a story. Who are the characters? What is the setting? Like a lot of times if a boss is in the room, people act differently than if the boss is not in the room. So who are the characters? What is the setting? How does the plot normally go? So break it down and understand that. The second step is do no harm. So maybe I understand it. I maybe don't know how to fix it, but don't make it worse. And it's very easy to just make things worse. So break down the scene, make it be committed to not making it worse. The third step is kind of like to revise the story. How could I bring another character into the scene? Can we maybe go to a local coffee shop instead of having it in the office? What can we go face to face instead of email? How could we change the scene? And then the fourth step is kind of like lines of the movie is action. Like try it, experiment with it, and what went well, great. And if it didn't go well, you revise it. And so it's iterative. And then the fifth step is it's like in the movie business, they would say like, let's do lunch. And what that means is communication is so much easier when we have relationship. Huh? So like the next time you and I interact on on like LinkedIn, we've got more relationship now, right? And so communication is easier when you have a strong relationship. So think of it as who are the characters? How does the plot go? Don't make it worse. How can I revise that? How can I try it and build relationships? And so one of the things I find is by keeping those things in mind, it helps me communicate better.
Okay. So break the scene down, do no harm, revise the story, action, try it, and let's go for lunch.
Let's go for lunch, exactly.
Let's go for lunch. And one last question. We all know that now we realize that what is important and what is not important. This COVID-19 has basically shown us all two colors. That compassion is the key. We have to take care of each other. And people have shown so much compassion all over the world. It's not just one country. All over the world, developed, underdeveloped, third world countries, everywhere people are helping each other. Then it's the people have laid off, but people are helping each other. But apart from that, we are seeing a new digital era. We are seeing Zoom has jumped up from 3 billion to a lot. Now Skype is going down. Now Facebook, all those networks are moving. So are we moving towards a new digital revolution?
So is the question how to leverage tools like Zoom or
yes.
Yeah, I am in Zoom almost every day, teaching or coaching. Yeah, right. You too, right? And so good practice. So if you have a bad meeting before COVID, putting it on Zoom will not help. It'll be bad too, right? So good meeting protocol, good meeting habits is true in both cases. But one of the things that I find is here's just one piece of advice. I got this from interviewing Nancy Duarte years ago, many years ago, 5 years ago, something like that. She said, the camera on your laptop or whatever your camera is usually has a little light next to it. She says, fall madly in love with that little light. And so, for example, if when I'm talking to you, I'm looking like this the whole time I'm talking to you, that's not as effective. If the whole time I'm talking to you, I look like this, that's not a very good idea, right? And so the idea is that try to, as much as possible, to give eye contact in the Zoom meeting and to try to keep cameras on. And Dr. Nick Morgan told me, try to keep it in frame. So like this would be a better frame. So staying close enough to the camera, like you're in a really good frame right now. So it just makes it more real. We can read people's expressions better. But if I'm way off in the distance, it will feel like I'm more distant. So I feel like, get to know the tools well. Like Zoom has amazingly good breakout room capability. Learn how to use the breakout rooms. Teach people how to use annotations. Get really good. I found the tool to be a very strong tool to use. But don't be afraid of it. Don't be afraid of it.
Okay. Thank you. It has been a really treat. We learned about habit and how can last habit. We learned about the five-step formula. It was a special treat for me and all my friends. Thank you, Andy. Thank you very much for your time. If you have any last comments.
I would love to connect with people on LinkedIn. So whoever is listening, just find me on LinkedIn. If you go to linkedin.com/in/build leaders, that will take you. Or if you go to peopleandprojectspodcast.com/LinkedIn, it goes to my profile. I'm on LinkedIn daily. It's a great way to interact. And if we've got over 138 hours of free PDUs now on the podcast. So if someone is certified, take advantage of those free PDUs. But even if somebody's not certified, I would say probably that Eric Hoffer quote that I shared earlier, that it's the learners who inherit the earth. Be a relentless learner, and follow you and your webisodes is a great way to do that.
Thank you. And I'm gonna put the link on FB, Twitter, so that people can follow your podcast. Thank you, Andy. It was great. Hopefully, we will meet some other time. Bye bye.
Thank you. Real pleasure. Thank you very much.